Hello, my friend. On today's episode, I'm back with Mr. Mark Fisher, and we're talking about Mark's experience owning both an independent gym and a franchise. We talk about the pros and cons of each for all of you out there who are thinking about opening one or the other, what the pros and cons might be for you as an owner. Just really getting some insight from Mark, who now has been a franchise owner for, I think, just over 2 years, and obviously ran his own independent gym with me for over 14 years. So it's a great episode with lots of insights comparing both independent gym ownership and franchising. So great one to get out your pen and paper with, take lots of notes, and let's dive in. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. Before we jump in, I want to let you know, in case you hadn't heard yet, that our friend Mark on the podcast today has written a new book in the last year. It's a little book of gym marketing secrets. And honestly, it's the book that all of you are going to wish you had when you first started your gym. And for those of you listening who haven't started your gym yet, congratulations. You have the book you need to start marketing your gym properly from day one. So if you haven't gotten the book yet, go ahead and click the link in the show notes below. You get a completely free, I'll repeat that, free digital copy. It's a quick read too. It's like maybe an hour of material. It's comprehensive with no fluff. It's everything you need and nothing you don't. So go click the link in the show notes and go get it. Fisher, how's feedback been about your little book of gym marketing secrets?
Yeah, I mean, I think people like it. You know, we probably can't say it's new anymore. I guess we probably need to update
new-ish. I put in the caveat of in the last year-ish.
Yeah, but you know, thank you for the indulgence of longtime listeners, because we were always having new people find us that have not probably heard about this. So hopefully, maybe you can take that as your marketing lesson, that you just have to keep saying things way more than you think is reasonable, because nobody's actually paying attention to you. And we know that you love us, but you're not paying attention to us much because you got things going on. We're not mad about it.
100%. Yeah. Until you're sick of talking about it, no one's heard about it yet.
Fair. Yeah. Just like leadership.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think it's great. I've heard great things about it. We have even Unicorn Society members who've been working with us for years who actively use it on a regular basis as a reference guide for the systems they're putting in place and the marketing they're doing. So it's a great one. All right. Well, welcome to the podcast, my friend. How have you been lately?
I have been very good. Yeah, we were recording this after the weekend, after we had our MFF transition party.
Yep.
Which I think went well. It was really nice to see a lot of the team. I definitely am, I think, realizing that I'm not going to get any closure from anybody but me about this very important part of my life that has just evaporated. You know, I was saying very much, it's a lot like, you know, the cliche, but actually incredibly poignant comment that you never know the last time you're going to hold your child.
Sure.
It's been interesting in that this process has been a lot of things that were wound up being the last time for me that I didn't know were going to be the last time for me. Yeah. So that's been interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe you and I just need to schedule like a weekend, you know, in the woods or somewhere fun, just to like reminisce, like make a slideshow, you know, like write journal. I don't know what we need to do, but
I don't know. Yeah, it's saying I don't know what we need.
I don't know what it is.
But there's some like Michael Littig, who Jesus of Unicorpia, a longtime team member, I know has always been a useful advocate for the importance of ritual, and I understand. In many ways, I've even things like Burning Man for me, I've constructed my life in ways where I'm forced against my will to go into sort of ritualistic like things because I know how much I benefit, but it's also just not my nature. I'm for an emotional person, strangely, like not sentimental. It's probably too emotional. I don't want to think about it. I just want to like go on the next thing. So, but anyway, that's a little insight into my brain. How are you?
Yeah, no, similar. Yeah. I mean, we had for those of you who don't maybe know exactly what we're talking about, you might remember Mark and I sold Mark Fisher Fitness as of January 1st. And we just had a party this two nights ago after as of recording this, where we just had we invited all our former employees to come and current employees, and had a little bit of a kind of passing the torch moment with to our new owner, who is Coach Fury, was a former employee of Mark Fisher Fitness, and all that was just a lot to take in. You know, it's a lot of old faces to see. That was lovely to see, folks. A lot of just thoughts and feelings about the transition. Mostly people very positive about it, but yeah, it's hard to know how how to turn this page. It's a turning of a page that I've never turned before. Right?
Yes.
We've all come and gone from jobs, right? But to have to kind of walk away from something you built requires a ritual I don't know how to make, right? Like there's some
Yeah,
ceremony
I know
or
what you mean.
process I don't know yet. I still feel pretty great about it. Like it's the right decision. I feel great. And you're right. There's probably still stuff that we're going to be processing for a while, and I think that's normal. Yeah. I'm sure we'll talk about it again more on this podcast, but let
I'm
me
sure.
switch gears to our topic today. And our topic today was really because you've now been a franchise owner for a
Yeah.
franchisee for how long now? Since
I mean, we've been open for about a year and a half, but because we had, unfortunately, a very long process of getting open, I think it was
it's been a
nearly
few
2 years before
years.
we got open. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been
So you were
several
gym owner
years.
for nearly 15 years, and now you've been a
Hmm.
franchisee for nearly 2 years. And I want to have a podcast just to talk about what are the similarities and differences
Yeah.
between owning your own independent gym versus being a franchisee for all of our listeners who are considering opening one or the other or both. What are the things that should be on their mind? So let's just start back and maybe just give people kind of a high level overview of what your experience was in opening both. So what was your mindset heading into MFF and your mindset heading into franchising, happening at two very different
Oh,
times in your life?
yeah. I mean, wildly different times. I mean, certainly MFF, probably like a lot of people listening to it wouldn't be accurate to say was accidental, though we do jokingly often say we accidentally opened up a gym. But,
Yeah.
in practice, like any independent gym owner, largely it was an extension of me being a personal trainer and wanting to have something that was a little bit more substantial that could impact more people and create more income, and in a perfect world would ultimately allow me to have a little bit more freedom where there wasn't as tight a coupling between my hours worked and the money I made, and also an opportunity to build a community and a culture, and all of that stuff was the thing I know that like was very interesting to me. And I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think was also interesting to you,
Yep.
particularly someone not from the industry, that was more like, oh, it's like my friend is doing this kind of interesting, cool thing. We can do it together. That'd be fun. And it was, that was great. And the reality is when you open up your first business, you also invariably are going to make mistakes because you've never done it before and you're going to do things wrong. And not that you don't continue to make any mistakes. I've certainly made many with the franchise, but in practice, because you are the one that's deciding the structure on the business, it gave us a lot of freedom to do whatever we wanted, and we made a lot of good decisions, and we in retrospect probably did some things that were not ideal for us or the business that then became very hard to unwind. And I think like that's probably the biggest difference and distinction between doing your own thing versus a franchise. A franchise, you have less of that freedom, and that is bad in many ways, but it's also great in a lot of ways because it's
Yeah.
also protecting you from yourself, and a lot of decisions are being made for you. So in theory, if you're part of a good system, you're getting a set of guardrails, and you are, you're playing by a songbook that in theory is well proven, right?
Yep.
And I think the other thing I'll mention briefly, and we can dig in a little bit further, is I was also in a very different place in my life by the time I did
Yep.
a franchise. So Mark Fisher Fitness had done well for many, many years. And I had developed skills. I kind of knew how to run gyms. And for me, a lot of the calculus was a lot of my money is going into more truly passive long-term investments, a lot of, passive indexed fund investing. And I knew I was likely going to get a pretty consistent return there that was good. But my thinking was, particularly because at the time I did it, I had been investing in a number of real estate syndicates, which in theory would do a little bit better. And certainly they were totally, totally passive. But in a perfect world, if you invest in a franchise, you damn sure better be able to do a lot better than an annualized, let's call it, 20% return, which would be like a really good target for, say, a real estate syndicate. And the reason you can do a lot better is because you're taking a lot more risk, right? But because like I both had access to capital and I knew how to run a gym, I was like, all right, I'm willing to put some of my time and energy into this because although there's more risk and work involved, I can really impact the outcome of this in the way that I can't impact what Apple's going to do. I don't have an impact on what the general partner of a real estate investment that I'm involved in is going to do. So at any rate, that was my thinking and why, at that point in my life professionally, it was something I was interested in doing.
Yeah, I think it's a good distinction. I think the thing that stands out to me is that for any listener who knows that they are a really creative thinker and a real entrepreneurial spirit and wants to build something where they have ultimate freedom to make all their decisions, even if they're wrong ones, they might need to be the person who owns their own gym
Yeah.
and lives or dies by their own decisions. And if someone who's like, you know, I like following the rules, I like having some more constraints, I like
Yeah.
someone who's given me a proven playbook. That those are pretty big distinctions between the two. Let's talk a little bit about what it takes to start one up, right? Both
Yeah.
require a little
Yep.
bit of a time to start, both require funding. So you can just talk a little bit
Yep.
about the differences there.
Yeah. So, the good news about a franchise, at least in theory, you're going to get a good sense of the ballpark of how much it's going to cost. And again, this varies wildly based on the system. You get access to something called the financial disclosure document, the FDD. So you have some sense of what it's cost for previous franchisees to open up. Now, it is a bit of a moving target because if you go as I did into a more expensive market, if you're as I did doing it in a time of aggressive inflation, you have to factor that in. You can't assume, and by the way, this is a mistake everybody makes in business. You do future math and you assume best case scenarios, and then life always is not the best case scenario, almost always. So, and again, pros and cons. So, in theory, it's easier to really estimate because you're getting help and figuring out, okay, exactly how much it's going to cost because it's broken down with breathtaking granularity of what you're going to spend on what. The downside is you can't really cut costs in most places. And again, there's pros and cons to that, right? Because sometimes you think you're a genius and you're cutting corners on things like equipment or how much you're investing in the space or your flooring. And then long term, that might mean that your business and your brand doesn't come across the way you might want. It means, and this was an issue for us at MFF,
Mm-hmm.
you have to keep investing in stuff over and over again because everything is breaking. I mean, how many versions of the floor did
Yep.
we go through for the, I
One
mean,
million.
originally, didn't we have we had press on,
Yeah.
what were like press on rugs? They were like
Peel and stick
1 foot by
carpet
1 foot peel and
tiles.
sticks. Like
Yeah.
that was the
Yeah.
floor
That's what we
because we
could
were like,
afford and what we could
yeah,
install ourselves. But, you know, dear God, that year was a nightmare of peel and stick
yeah,
carpet tiles.
yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly in New York, and particularly with high traffic. New York
Yeah.
was very dirty. But again, there's, those are some pros and cons because
Yeah.
the pro is you can save a lot of money. The franchise, that's the downside. You can't cut those corners, right? And that too is something you need to factor into this. If you have less money, if you're less capitalized, sometimes doing your own thing can make more sense. It's just a different set of risk and return, right? Because I think another high level to think about this, in theory, in a perfect world, you are giving away some of the return. You're going to get less return, right? Because you have to invest more upfront, number one, and to say nothing of you're giving, depending on the franchise, anywhere from usually 5 to 9% gross. Huge percentage of every dollar that comes in is going out the door to the franchisor
Yeah.
in exchange for them giving you a business in a box. But in theory, you have lower risk because you're not alone. The franchise has not only a financial incentive to get your money, right? Which is like they want your money, but they want you to succeed, right? They want you
Yeah.
to succeed because, um, you know, it's not good for the system if businesses are closing. And you do have, I mean, that is a huge advantage of a franchise, which we can approximate to some extent is independent gym owners and something like the Unicorn Society. But it is really valuable to be able to compare apples to apples, right? Because every independent gym runs their business a little bit different. Obviously, you can still learn a ton, right? And again, you're taking more risk, you're getting more of the return, you have more freedom, but it means that every gym in the Unicorn Society often has like a slightly different front end offer and a slightly different website design and a different sales script and a different sales funnel, a different training SOP, a different set of systems to build community and retention. And that's all well and good. You get that freedom, but because in a franchise it maps so closely, it is unbelievably valuable to talk to other people in the system just because you can compare exactly percentages of KPIs. Now, again, different teams, different markets, that is also going to impact things, right? So there's definitely still going to be an element of luck involved, and there's still going to be variance, but that is a very different kind of comparison than with another gym owner that does large, slightly different business model in a different market, a different team setup, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a great point you make there, right? Because I think when you're in a franchise system, just there's variables, like you said, market, et cetera. But they're just going to be much less. That's
Yeah.
going to be like speaking as someone
Yep.
who speaks English, but maybe they have an accent, as opposed
Yep.
to in Unicorn Society, often we're dealing with people who frankly
Different
kind of speak
languages.
different
Yeah.
languages
Great metaphor.
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think that's a really great one. So it's kind of in theory easier to get help when you're part of a system of people doing things very much like yours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey there, Business of Unicorns podcast listeners. I'm just making absolutely sure you have already gotten your free, instantly downloadable copy of my new book, The Little Book of Gym Marketing Secrets. You can find a link to download it in the show notes, or you can go to gymmarketingsecretsbook.com. I worked super hard to make sure this is a less than a 30-minute read and is a comprehensive overview of all the things you need to do to grow your gym, get more leads, more clients, and importantly, change more lives. Again, find the link in the show notes where you can download your free copy at gymmarketingsecretsbook.com. And now back to the podcast. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, the other thing they'll add that is, I think, obviously part of the consideration is most independent gyms. And I think this is changing. Certainly we did it, but for a long time it was considered you couldn't really sell an independent gym.
Sure.
If you did, you were going to get like a 1X maybe, or you were just liquidating the equipment, maybe selling the contact list.
Yep.
There's not as many buyers for an independent gym, right? Because independent money people are usually not buying gyms.
Yeah.
So mostly you're going to sell to an employee or a competitor or a client. It's usually not like an independent money person, right?
Yeah.
So now, again, that can happen. We're seeing more and more of the independent gym owners are selling. But in theory, particularly if you're a good franchise system, it is easier to sell. Now, again, there's downsides. There are other costs associated with selling the franchise. There's tons more fees involved beyond the usual cost of selling, of people paying franchise fees and all that stuff. So you have to consider that and factor that in too.
Yeah.
But in a vacuum, it is fair to say it is generally going to be easier to sell a franchise than it is going to sell a independent gym.
Yeah. I want to pull that string a little bit more about kind of the relationship between the franchisee and the franchise, mothership. Because, I think obviously when you own your own independent gym, you need to kind of seek out and build your own network of support, whether that's, tax people, accountants, business coaches, marketing agencies. And you really have to rely on, your own personal network to find out who to trust and who to try. And with a franchise, what kind of support and guidance can you really expect for them, either generally speaking or in your experience with Alloy? What really kind of support do they tend to offer?
Yeah, I mean, as far you're asking as far as like sourcing possible
All of the
vendors.
above, sourcing vendors, getting help with marketing, all that kind of stuff. I think there's a pretty wide range of things they tend to offer. And this is often the place when, at least talking to the handful of franchisees and Unicorn Society member I've seen, this is the place where there's often, if there's any tension between the franchisee and the franchisor, it's often in this context, in like, you said you would offer this kind of support and you either don't, or it's not working, or it's not enough. Right. And so like, what generally speaking can people expect the franchisor to offer?
Yeah. So, God, I mean, first of all, I'll say like I had worked with this kind of amazing guy that shepherded me through this. I know that I feel like I'm enough of an expert in franchise to be like, this is really what it should always be.
Sure.
And I'm sure there's a good framework, but in general, they're giving you business systems, right? They're giving you business in a box. So they're giving you a system there's a system for pre-sales. There should be a system for what the sales process is. There's a system for delivering whatever the service is, right? Or the product, if you're, not in fitness. They also are going to recommend vendors that, like, at least in theory, should be vetted. There's obviously going to be variance there too, and reasonable people can degree how good a vendor is or isn't. In some situations, they might even require you use a certain vendor, and again, that can be good or bad, right, depending on the situation. So, and you're right. Like, I think the cliche thing is a lot of franchisees, I think, and it's interesting, like, being in the position I am, I think a lot of franchisees, it is easy to underappreciate the things that the franchisor is doing. And at the same time, there are franchisors that are not good.
Yeah.
Right. And it is hard, I think, as a franchisee, I'll say that even for me, like, I only have experience in one system. So I have a sense of the way it's supposed to go. Overall, I've had a good experience. And I'm sure within the system there are probably people that are like, we're not getting,
Yeah.
what we thought we were going to get. And I think to some extent it's similar to, now it's not like you're not a client, right? I think it's the hard part about a franchisor. It's a very unique relationship.
Yeah.
You're not a client, but of course there are parallels in that. Sometimes we know as gym owners,
Mm-hmm.
you try to do everything you could to be clear about what could be expected and what wasn't. And you're some percentage of the time, it's not going to work. There's going to be
Yeah.
people that had expectations that didn't get met, that are often going to be upset with you,
Yeah. Well,
and
I
sometimes it can
imagine.
feel very aggrieved because you're like, I tried to make clear to you, what this was and what this
Yeah.
wasn't. Um,
I imagine if I was in your shoes as a franchisee, I would be asking myself every month. It feels like it's human nature to be like, well, I'm sending you somewhere between 5 and 9% of my gross revenue. For what?
yeah.
For what?
Yep.
Like, are you
Yep.
doing enough every month for me to for that to feel worth it? And I don't even know
Yep.
if that's a fair question, but it seems like a
Yep.
really natural one to want to ask. And certainly
Yep.
we get that experience with business of unicorns. With unicorns,
Yep.
I remember saying, I'm giving you this money each month, and
Yeah.
I have to ask once in a while, is this
Yeah.
worth it?
It is very, very, very similar, right?
Yeah.
Because like, group coaching in general, even what we do, right? And we're
Mhm.
like hardly the, discount provider. It's still going to be a fraction of what you're
Yes.
going to pay
Yep.
for franchising, right? So yeah, I think that is the nature of the beast. It's, and to some extent, again, this sort of maps onto everybody, with every business owner, with every employee. Everyone's like, what am I paying you people for? You always have those
Yep.
thoughts creep in, which may or may not be valid. That's why this is so complicated, because reasonable people can disagree about it. But yeah, it's true. Like, listen, you have to, I think, be very thoughtful about the character of who you're getting in bed with,
Yeah.
right? Because like that's a lot of it, is because the reality is like, everybody's going to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's going to do dumb things. They're going to mess stuff up. Everybody's going to have blind spots. Like, I don't mean to be like sound like really pessimistic, but the one thing I've observed is I've never met a human without some really incredible gaping character flaws that are obvious to everybody but the person.
Yeah.
That's just like the nature of the beast, right? So you're not, but the good news is you're not looking for perfection, right? It's not there. You're looking for, do I believe this person has the character, this organization has the character to want to do the right thing and want to get it right?
Yeah.
And then I think you give them grace that, like, yeah, they're going to have to figure things out too, just as you're going to make mistakes as well. Which is why I think like that has to be a big part of that equation. And then, yeah, like you'll have to just, make peace with yourself around like what sort of investment you want to make or not. And certainly that's part of the consideration, right? Are you willing to give away more of the risk in exchange for what in theory should be less? I'm sorry. Are you willing to give away more of the return for what in theory should be less of the risk? And different people are going to come down differently. And, I feel good about my decision for the, the context of my life and where I was at and what I was looking for. But I think, people listening, of course, the other thing, my assumption is a lot of you listening are deciding like, is this the right next thing for me?
Yeah.
And again, listen, there are some pros and cons. Like the reality is you're comparing this for a lot of you, assuming you're already a gym owner. Do I do my own thing, or do I potentially, sign a non-compete, say I'm not going to open up more of my current location, and then do something that's a little more scalable for my second location? And in some situations, that's going to make a lot of sense, right? Like
Yeah.
there's not a lot of people that scale up past several locations of an independent gym. Now we're starting to see that for the first time. The industry's maturing. So just as we're starting to see people, sell their gyms for many hundreds of $1,000s, sometimes into the seven figures, that I think we're starting to see more knowledge of the ecosystem of gym owners where people can really make a swing and go for 10, 15, 20 units that are corporate owned without doing it through a franchise.
Yeah.
And in general, I would say, speaking of vacuum, that if you're really looking for bigger scale, not knowing who I'm talking to here, I think a lot of gym owners might want to consider outsourcing some things, and having a place with a track record of scaling up to multiple locations. And also, again, the big advantage of a franchise for a lot of people, and I'm particularly sensitive to this, but for me is the constraints.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I really value the fact that I don't have to think about like, what should I be paying people? Again, you still have to make those decisions,
Yeah.
but you're basing it off benchmarks, right? You have to decide what you're going to charge, but you don't get to make up any membership options you want, right? Like that stuff. So that even though you have as the franchisee, you are responsible for setting prices in your market. You can't start thinking about like, well, what if I offer this other service or this? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Certainly people do that, and the franchisor gets mad at people correctly when they do it, because you're no longer singing from the same songbook if you do that.
Yeah.
But for me, again, like I like to keep things simple at this point in my life. I don't mind being forced to do that. And again, for me, the benefit is I just have to think less.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I'm happy to pay some of my return.
And I think for a lot of
To
people starting off,
think
that's
less.
like such a valuable place to start, right? It's like
Yeah.
if you want to be a pizza maker, don't open a McDonald's franchise, right? Like you really making
Yeah.
sure that, you know, what the work you want to do is aligned with the place that you are partnering with. And then you'll still have plenty of freedom. You'll have plenty of freedom to make plenty of really important decisions. And you'll also have really
Totally.
helpful constraints to not allow yourself to spiral into into random directions that don't serve you. I think for a lot of folks that
Yeah.
could be a really good start. And
It's really
for that,
true.
yeah, and for that same reason, which is, you know, part of the reason why I'm not a franchisee, is that I think that would drive me crazy. Like
You would go insane.
yeah, I
Yes,
would
you would
go
be
insane.
hell. You would be in hell.
I like sticky, messy problems I have to solve without
Yep.
any benchmarks.
Well, you wouldn't be in hell. You would just keep getting in trouble because you would just
I
keep,
would just
like,
I
no,
would just break all the
I like
rules.
this. This is better. This is stupid.
It's true. But like, I'm self-aware that I know that's either one of my strong suits
Yeah.
or my biggest flaws. I'm not sure. It's a mixture of both, I'm sure. But you know, I'm someone who probably shouldn't do that anytime soon. You know, at least for something like a gym.
Yeah.
Um,
And listen, you know, it's interesting too, because there's different, you know, beyond the scope of today's conversation.
yeah,
We're talking about franchising generally, but my assumption is most of you are like correctly thinking about this from fitness. But
yeah,
yeah, there are very different franchise models. And, you know, as we maybe move to a close here, for me, and we were talking before we rolled, I am also lucky in my particular circumstance. It is valuable for me as a lifer fitness person to understand every possible nook and cranny of this industry as deeply as I can.
yep,
So I am also benefiting from the experience of running a different gym that I had run in New York City in a different market with a different brand. And there have been a lot of lessons, right? And some
yep,
lessons from like, oh crap, some of these things didn't go as well as I thought. I knew correctly I would expose some of my own limitations and have to shore them up. So for me, that has been a huge value. And I would say for people listening, whether you decide to ever open up a franchise or not, for a lot of you, you know, again, I assume for the typical listeners, probably never going to make sense for you to do it.
yeah,
But I would encourage you to study franchising as a model, right? E-Myth, which we talk about constantly, um, all over the place, is a very good book to read. And it's that book, they use the example of franchising
hmm,
as a turnkey business. So whether you ever decide to open up a franchise or not, I have learned so much by studying franchising, and not, again, not just in fitness. So that's been valuable too, by really understanding the way different fitness franchise models work, but just franchising as a system, right? Like
yes.
non-industry specific. Um,
Because when you're studying
in part
franchising,
because,
you are studying
yeah,
systems that scale, right? How to
yes,
create systems that
yes,
scale by
and how to
definition.
do so in
Yeah.
ways that are simple and that don't require. I mean, this is like maybe like a crude thing to say, but a good franchise system doesn't need a genius to run it.
Hmm.
Right. If you need a genius to run it, we got issues, right? Like, you know, and sometimes that can happen with, you can have a beautiful business, right? We've been pretty candid. MFF, as much as we love it, as much as an incredible business it was, the limitation was the version of it that we ran, particularly back in the day. And I don't want to say it's like we were like super geniuses, but like we're pretty good at what we do, but we made a very difficult train to drive, right?
Totally.
And we were able to do it because we were very good, and and to our, you know, we also built the train for us, probably, and for our own strengths and as a reflection probably of our own weaknesses.
Yep.
But in practice, a great business that scales shouldn't require rocket scientists to do all the things. You want to have systems that are able to do that, and that the ability to keep things simple, I think, is like the work of a lifetime. It's the very cliche, the Bruce Lee, like at first the punch was just a punch, and then a punch was no longer just a punch, and then eventually became a punch again. You almost invariably have to go through, I think for most people, most of the time, go through a version of your career, and this is very much something I relate to, where you see all the ends and it
Hmm.
becomes so hard because you can see so many things that make it simple. And then you spend the rest of your career like etching back and back and back to the most important principles. And franchising, I think, can help fast track that thinking and seeing by understanding the way franchising works, by understanding what a P&L looks like for franchise. It's very, very simple. For understanding that, a franchise gives you your systems, but I think a complaint a lot of franchisees have of franchisors and franchise systems, they're like, oh, there's nothing here. And it's like, it's like kind of the point. It's like simple,
Yeah.
and again, reasonable people could disagree. I'm not saying that there are no franchises that are probably are too light. They probably do give you too little in exchange for that. But sometimes that's not a bug. That's actually a feature. The whole point is it's simple. So they're not going to give you 1,000 SOPs because nobody can do that. They're going to give you a handful of core things that if you just do those, the whole machine should work well.
Yeah. I think it's a good place to wrap. I think you covered a lot of really great and I think insightful pros and cons, both to what it's meant for you in your life, what it might mean for our listeners to own one kind of gym versus the other. I think at the end of the day, something I hope our listeners are taking away is that even if you're never going to open a franchise, understanding and studying some franchises, understanding how to keep things simple, how to create systems that scale, how to create things that can be easily run by someone without advanced degrees of rocket science. That like all of those are really great lessons for any entrepreneur, whether you're going to own a franchise or not. And so I hope that those are some of the takeaways. Awesome, my friend. Well, thanks for a great chat. It was really fun. I actually don't hear you talk much about this part of your world, so it was fun for me to listen in on your current thinking. So for you, dear listeners, if you haven't gotten Mark's little book of gym marketing secrets, go down to the show notes. Get it now. It's a completely free digital copy, and you'll be so glad you did. Thanks, Fisher. I'll see you on the next one.
Bye.